Buddhists cherish what they call the four great illimitables. These are four qualities of which there can never be enough. They are loving kindness, compassion, joy in the joy of others, and equanimity. A good Buddhist thus gains a spiritual maturity that calmly and impartially loves and cares for others. Buddhist meditation clearly aims at reducing the emotional fever of life. It produces a clear, calm-mindedness that sees things as they truly are, without the distortions of self-concern, hopes and fears, loves and hatreds. Meditation frees the meditator from the distortions that so often determine what we think, feel and do. The Deer Park sermon was the beginning of the Buddha's 45-year career as an itinerant spiritual teacher. He traveled about northeastern India as a mendicant teacher-monk, followed by a band of disciples. The most notable of Buddha's disciples was Ananda, his constant companion and personal attendant. Ananda formally admitted others into the Buddha's presence, and he became the official rememberer of many of the Buddha's discourses. All this kept Ananda so busy that he had no time to achieve his own enlightenment. The Buddha's life eventually ended when he ate poisonous food that was offered accidentally by a smith named Chanda. Buddhist legend says that the wise Buddha knew the food was bad, but he was not willing to refuse food offered to him, and then ordered the remainder to be destroyed. The Buddha lay down on his right side in the so-called lion posture. He instructed the monks to let his lay disciples make all decisions about disposing of his ashes. These ashes were to become prized possessions. The Buddha said Chanda should not be blamed for the accident. His good intentions would produce good merit for his next rebirth. Besides, it was time for the Buddha to leave the world of men.
But he did that so that he will be able to eradicate suffering from the human beings. That was his whole intention. His whole teaching was anti-metaphysical. He was not at all trying to do any kind of intellectual teaching. He said, "Oh, Bhikkhu, if you really love me, then do the practice, not the theories. An ounce of practice is much more superior than tons of theories."
Gautama Buddha was born into a Brahmanical religious tradition which says each of us is perpetually reborn in a way that's governed by our karmic deeds. He cast aside the dependence upon priestly ritual and sacrifice, and he said that the aid of the gods is futile, because the gods also need release from the cycles of rebirth. The key to nirvana is within oneself, and Buddhism has repeatedly emphasized this core belief during its long and diverse development. During the last centuries BCE, a new sectarian name had first appeared in India. In centuries to come, this name would designate a major new type of Buddhist doctrine and practice. Mahayana, meaning the great or universal means of salvation, would be the name of the Buddhism adopted in China, Korea, and Japan. Mahayana Buddhists began to produce new scriptures. They used the Pali scriptures in much the same way as Christians used the Hebrew scriptures. Mahayana Buddhists believed that the Theravada scriptures had set forth many of the real truths of Buddhism. Buddhas come to earth to save men from their passions, from their appetites, from the ills of samsara. Mahayana scriptures continue to refer to the earthly life of Gautama Buddha.
For many people in East Asia, this selection came to be the Lotus, so-called Lotus Sutra. It was this text that has so dominated Japanese Buddhist life, has been extremely important for both Korea and China. And it is a Mahayana, so-called Mahayana text, which teaches the major doctrine behind it is that the Buddhist tradition and the work which the Buddha has done is something which is available to all individuals. So there's a kind of universal salvation doctrine in the Lotus Sutra which has had enormous appeal through the centuries.
The lotus flower is a type of water lily, and it is a widespread and popular Buddhist symbol. The lotus grows up out of the slime and muck in the bottom of a pond, and it blossoms into a very beautiful flower on the water's surface. The lotus is the perfect symbol of a life of purity lived in the midst of a defiling world. The Lotus Sutra, written in Sanskrit probably during the 3rd or 4th century CE, was translated into Chinese during the 4th and 5th centuries. The Lotus Sutra became the most influential scripture of Mahayana, and it is full of themes that are central to Mahayana beliefs. The main thrust of Mahayana Buddhism was to expand and reinterpret the old Buddhist doctrines, beliefs, and practices. Now was the goal.
Desire to progress spiritually. And if you really want to elevate your higher grades of consciousness, then you need to do something. You need to discipline your life, purify your mind, something like if you want to grow a vegetable or flower, you need to cultivate a piece of land. So in the same way, if you want to practice the Dharma, you have to cultivate your mind.
The Mahayana Bodhisattva is willing to remain in samsara, to be born again and again, endlessly, always striving for the welfare of his fellow beings, until these beings too attain release.
The Bodhisattva, Bodhi means enlightened, Sattva means being, enlightened being. And her or his vow was to not enter nirvana until everyone was enlightened. So now this is very important, because we're always doing things for ourselves. But she's waiting for everyone, the whole humanity, to be enlightened before she enters nirvana. So in the front part, you look at her face and she's pretty calm. And then the 3 faces above her face are pretty calm. But as you go clockwise around, the faces become more and more filled with anger, frustration, anxiety, horror, until you come to the last 3. And that's devastation, despair, and hopelessness. And this is the part where most young people, or even just people, but I'm thinking of the young people, that's where they kill themselves or commit suicide. But what the Bodhisattva wears this as a crown, because this is part of life. And because we have a mind and a body, we're going to encounter this, whether you're a Buddhist or not. So she wears it as her crown, as her path.
Though monks and monasteries were still needed, a layperson no longer had to hope to be reborn as a monk. Anyone could follow the Bodhisattva path of benevolence, and the highest of all lives became the life of self-giving in the ordinary world. Within Buddhism, a person's karma represents the power of his or her voluntary deeds to shape a rebirth in the next life. The evildoer is reborn into unpleasant or painful destinies, and the doer of good is reborn into pleasant fates.
Karma is nothing but volition. So karma is something that all the different actions that we perform through our speech, our deed, and our mind, and those actions, they accumulate different kinds of forces. Some are good, some are bad, some are superior, some are neutral.
Good deeds and meditational attainments receive equally fabulous rewards in the higher realms of enjoyment. Life in the very highest level of all, that of neither perception nor non-perception, lasts for 84,000